STD and TB administration at the District of Columbia Department of Health. Dean Hayder, thank you for being here and thank you for welcoming us.
You will hear me from here. Yeah, great. So I get the luxury of welcoming you all. So welcome, good afternoon. I am so excited to be here for this event. Thanks to Garret and Michelle for helping to organize this and the Transatlantic Policy Center for co-sponsoring the event, part of our Ambassadors Up Close series. So just a little bit of bragging for Garret and Michelle. The Transatlantic Policy Center is focusing this year, right, on the theme of enlargement. This next spring marks the 20th anniversary of the EU adding 10 new states, including Estonia. And that 20-year-ago expansion was known as a historic expansion. And I think you'll learn a little bit why as we have this conversation here today. There is a natural kinship between both Finland and Estonia, but also Finland, Estonia, and SIS. Finland is a leader in sustainability, and Estonia is at the forefront of digital innovation. 99% of state services are available online, which we could aspire to that. That is fantastic. And as many of you probably know, technology and digital and environmental studies are key SIS areas of focus, hence why we think this is a really exciting topic and set of guests for today. I was told to share a fun fact. Both countries are very keen about saunas. Is that true? Saunas? With Finland having being an active proponent of sauna diplomacy. And there is apparently a hot invitation inside the Beltway you can have for sauna diplomacy. So we'll hear a little bit more about that maybe. But now on to our distinguished guests. Mikko Hautala became an ambassador of Finland to the United States in September 2020. Prior to that, he served as ambassador to Russia. Previously, he was a whole host of dynamic and important roles. He was a foreign policy advisor to the president of Finland. He was deputy head of mission to Russia. He has served as the diplomatic advisor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, as well as has been the first secretary at the permanent representation of Finland to the EU in Brussels. Early in his career, he served as the attaché at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Helsinki and as the attaché at the Embassy of Finland in Kyiv, Ukraine. Right? Very exciting. Our second guest, Kristjan Prikk, became the Estonian ambassador to the United States in May 2021. Prior to that, he served as the permanent secretary of the Estonian Ministry of Defense. Previous roles include Undersecretary for Defense Policy in the Ministry of Defense, the Director of National Security and Defense Coordination Unit of the Estonian Government Office, Defense Counselor at the Estonian Embassy in Washington, D.C. So second tour here with us in D.C. And the Director of International Cooperation Department in Tallinn. So we are so thrilled to have guests here today. It's going to be an exciting discussion, and back over to Garret and Michelle. Thank you.
I hope everybody can hear me. Please feel free to sit in the front. We're quite welcome. Thank you all for coming today. Oh, I got to turn it on. You all here? Okay, so thank you all for coming today, and I get the privilege of asking the first question. We have some people on Zoom who may be also asking questions, and there will be plenty of opportunity at the end for students to come up to the microphones. So I would like to ask you the first question, and it really fits in nicely with Shannon's comment about enlargement. And I would like to ask, does Europe need reforms to deal with the prospect of new members, you know, those who are in the queue? And we're hearing a lot about Ukraine, and today Juncker saying somewhat negatively about Ukraine and enlargement. Do we need reform to enlarge in terms of the EU? Yeah, sure. Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, do you hear me now? Okay, and thank you very much for this question, but even more, or in more general sense, thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today with my fellow Ambassador Hautala. So I'd love to answer all kinds of questions that you may have today. Now about the enlargement, and yes, Estonia is the country that went through the successful EU enlargement in 2004, and ever since we have been among those countries that have been more enthusiastic about possible future enlargements of the European Union. Having said that, and very much based on our own experience of enlargement, we are staunch supporters of enlargement that is based on fulfilling the conditions that countries are introduced with in order to become the member of the European Union. I won't burden you with all the description of these conditions, but basically, in order to become a member of the European Union, countries had to go through a rigorous set of reforms in order to fit into the same family. After all, it's about the common market. It's about the common foreign and security policy. So the countries really have to be aligned when it comes to dealing with each other within the European Union. Now, whether we need reforms when talking about the potential enlargement to Ukraine, I believe the assessment right now is that we in fact have the tools for going through the next set of enlargement. We only have to make sure that we apply the existing rules in a way that they were designed to be, and we make sure that the next countries to join the alliance, not alliance, but the European Union, that they again have met the different criteria for becoming the member. Very shortly, I would also reference to the, or you actually mentioned the comments from the former president of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker, and I was a bit puzzled by his comments, because I really don't know anyone, any serious person in Europe who is currently or has recently been advocating for admitting Ukraine as is overnight as a member of European Union. I don't think anyone seriously in Ukraine thinks of it either. This is why they have very eagerly also they have spelled out their own understanding of the need for reforms and the need for going through this rigorous process of aligning their own legislation, their own regulatory environment with the one of European Union. Thank you.
Can I, Ambassador, can I ask the question maybe for you for enlargement, but also it's NATO's 75th anniversary? I mean, how important do you think it is for NATO to continue to have this policy of open door? And how important do you think it's also for the stability of Europe to be able to have the option on the table for countries like Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia or others?
Well, first of all, also thanks for inviting me. This is my second debate here, and I'm always happy to come back. And still on saunas, Madam Dean. We actually have 3 saunas at the embassy. So, and the top sauna is, of course, the ambassador sauna. But you have to go through all the saunas to graduate to that's PhD level of saunas. And we actually run so-called Diplomatic Sauna Society, Washington, D.C. And we usually market is as the hottest ticket in town. So once you have made it, you know that you've made it. So be careful. On the NATO enlargement, obviously for us, I give an example. When I used to work as a president's foreign policy advisor, I got quite often guests from America, sometimes congressmen, sometimes somebody else. Usually at the end of the meeting, they asked me, is there anything what could you like to have? Is there anything we can do for you? I said, yes, keep the NATO door open. And they usually said, well, are you planning to join? I said, no, but keep it open. Because if the door is open, that's already a part of the policy. We know it's a possibility. A possibility is already part of the policy. If you close it, and especially if you lock it, then things will change. And this is exactly what President Vladimir Putin tried to do in December 2021. He was saying that no more enlargement of NATO, no new members, and the military infrastructure has to be withdrawn from those member states, including Estonia, that are next to Russia. So basically, our policy had always been that we may join, we may apply one day, but it has to be us and NATO who defines that issue, not him. So once they tried to close the door for us without asking from us, obviously that actually set the process in motion in Finland, that if he tries to kind of paint us out, we probably have to reconsider this. So he basically got exactly the opposite what he wanted originally. So NATO open doors is extremely important part of the policy. And like I said, if you close it, it destabilizes certain countries. And in this case, it would basically take the hope away from the Ukrainians if you would do that. Then still on the conditions, NATO also has conditions, EU has even further reaching conditions. I dealt for 5 years in Brussels dealing with the enlargement. So it's a really tough process. It's a really, really tough process. Why? Why is it a tough process? It's basically almost as if a foreign country would like to be 51st state of the US. We need to get your financing. We have to have access to your financing. We have to have access to everything. We have to have access to your internal market. So you would like to be pretty careful whom you actually accept as a part of the union. So this is the reason why the process is so tough. And it has to be tough, and nobody has any illusions that Ukraine has a lot of things to do in order to get there. But they will also get support to get there. But ultimately, it will depend on their own will to fulfill those reforms, because you have to be fit to compete in the union in order to actually survive, because no more kind of free state subsidies. It's a tough competition policy. So your economy, your society has to be ready for that if you are sort of to succeed in the system. But NATO, extremely important to keep the door open. Otherwise, we simply hand the victory to Mr. Putin.
I think this is a good, obviously, I'm sure we followed the events not far from here on Congress and the uncertainty that has caused about the funding for Ukraine. But I also want to ask, there are rumblings in European societies about, I think there's still high levels of support, but there are also questions about how long at what price. So I'm curious for both of you, a perspective of how do you maintain a sustainable approach to funding and supporting Ukraine? Because this could be, again, many, many years forward. And I think you need to keep that public opinions, and that's a difficult challenge. So I'm just curious about your impression of, and I should also mention that the 27 members of the EU, the foreign ministers were in Kyiv, again, that shows a continued support. But so I'm just curious about your impressions of how to approach that challenge of sustaining support, both in Europe, but also in the United States.
I think in our case, it's easy to speak because we have a very strong support in our society. We basically have no discussion against continuing to support Ukraine. I think there's a steadfast kind of idea in the society that you basically can decide, do you want to stop Putin now in Ukraine, or do you choose to, after Ukraine has been lost, try to stop him elsewhere with the higher cost? So it's a gloomy choice. It's a really gloomy choice, but that's the way we believe it is. How to maintain public support? I think the most critical aspect is that when people understand fully what's at stake and the mindset is right, they understand where we are, then it's easier for them to conclude that, hey, this is something that deserves our support. If people have a kind of unclear idea why this is happening, why we are helping, how serious the consequences would be if our failure, if our support would fail, that would be for our country. So this is the kind of it's up to the politicians, it's up to opinion leaders to make sure that people do understand this. I think then, of course, the difficulty in the US discussion, I get it, because I think many of those people who are critical towards continuing to help Ukraine, they kind of compare the help with their own everyday day of life kind of difficulties, like I need support for this, I want to have cheaper medications, I want to have childcare. So now the billions are moving to Ukraine, and why I don't get this support. So this is a very difficult, because these are different issues. A tank that is sent to Ukraine doesn't give you any childcare services in the first place. So these are not easily comparable things, but people increasingly kind of make this kind of a comparison, which is not right. So it's a tough communication task, and I don't think we have all been equally successful in making clear what's at stake.
Yeah, if I may, and then I first would love to just concur what Ambassador Hautala said. And I think he put it very well, that it's not only about doing the right thing, but also about making sure that you explain what's the objective, how you intend to get there, and what's at stake. Of course, in the case of Estonia, it's probably somewhat easier for our general public to understand what's at stake. Estonia was independent until the Second World War, but then as a result of Soviet-Nazi deal that ultimately unleashed the Second World War, Estonia was occupied mostly by the Soviet Union from 1940 to 1991. As a result of this Second War, we lost approximately 20% of our population due to people getting killed, people getting deported to Siberia, or people fleeing the country from the occupation, and quite often ending up in America. In my own case, my predecessor, our first ambassador to the United States, he was a prominent statesman. He was a very well regarded or highly regarded diplomat. Yet he ended up being killed by the Soviets in the dark forest in Siberia in 1942. And this is the kind of stories that every family in Estonia has, and therefore, and as we see, the methods and the aims of Russian Federation today, as crazy as it sounds, have not changed that much. Now, when it comes to the rest of Europe, I believe that we have crossed the Rubicon in the sense that there is a wide understanding in Europe that this tragedy that is going on every day in Ukraine right now. Today, there was approximately 50 people killed who were waiting in the village store or in front of the village store. This tragedy is not just about Ukraine. After all, the war aims seem to be very clearly about how to rearrange the entire European and transatlantic security architecture. So if Vladimir Putin gets what he wants, then this will not only be a tragedy for Ukrainians, but this will be something that will seriously, strategically, and negatively impact the lives of every single European.
I almost feel we should continue that conversation. But besides Russia, we also have an increased focus in Europe on China. And Europe has increasingly passed trade instruments. It's had a new economic security document. I sort of wonder, how are you balancing both as individual member states, but also the EU? How do you sort of balance that de-risking, the de-risking and then engagement with China on political and economic issues?
I think in our case, like the US, we have a lot of trade with China. So there's China is an important partner in trade. But we also do recognize the change in China's policies, change in their behavior. And obviously, I think the European Union, all our member states, we agree on the same assessment on China. And part of the assessment is that it is a systemic competitor. It causes challenges to the union. So I think we are all facing the same kind of balancing act, which is that you have the economic dependency, if you want to use that term, while you have to start thinking, how do you manage your economic kind of supply chains, sensitive technologies in a way that you don't end up risking some of your key security, national security interests. So this is there is no one single easy answer to this question. I think it's a process when we in the European Union with our neighboring countries, we try to assess continuously what does it mean in this or that particular field, and then we apply subsequently some measures. To give an example, Finland, I think we were one of the first countries in the European Union that had already investment screening legislation in place. That it's not neutral. I mean, we have to see who's investing. If they don't share our values, if there are some suspicions, we have to make sure that there is an element of control where they can invest, what kind of technology they can have access to, and things like that. So everybody in the European Union is doing more or less now the same, and we have our own common guidelines to guide that process. So I would say on this issue, the Europeans and Americans are, obviously the US, you are more of an Indo-Pacific power. We have some European member states like France, who is also an Indo-Pacific power. But nevertheless, we are largely on the same page in assessing this issue. And I think we are all facing the same kind of issues.
Yeah, on this very same issue, just a couple of more points for me. Firstly, I had the feeling that when it comes to China and Europe, then quite often the public perception and the perception in the political debate outside of Europe, so including in America, is somewhat off when it comes to European engagement or let's say dependency on China in trade and other factors. Again, of course, the trade is by volumes it's high. It's been certainly going up like this over the past couple of decades, but it may not be as equally large as people may think. In my country's case, our trade relationship with China, I mean, it's solid, but we're talking about mostly single digits in terms of percentages. Also, when we talk about dependencies, I mean, I think we really don't care whether our, I don't know, rubber ducks or shower heads are made in one country or another. And if as long as they are really good, I think we should buy wherever they come from. But when it comes to the issue of trusted vendors, when it comes to matters of national security, particularly, I think the tide has turned. The 5G debate was certainly, let's say, probably a start of it. But now I believe that we are moving ahead, where actually we talk about any equipment that can handle, for example, the collection, the analyzing, filing, storing of data that is relevant to national security, that is relevant to privacy of our citizens, and I believe that we are moving more and more towards the, let's say, secure or safe vendors direction, which also means that there will be more, let's say, nearshoring and friendshoring. I also believe that, particularly when it comes to some signature industries going through major changes, like European car industry or car markets suddenly being seriously penetrated by Chinese companies. These developments serve as kind of wake-up calls, and I believe this is already happening, and there is certainly also a direct link with the Russian war in Ukraine. After all, particularly when we talk about the national security related matters, whether it's about technology, whether it's about trade links. I for one certainly can testify that in Estonia, the fact that China had and still has the opportunity to be on the other side, to be on the side of not on the side of the aggressor in this particular conflict, but yet thus far they have chosen to be together with Russia, has also influenced the political thinking in my country. And political thinking, I'm not just referring to the members of parliament or members of government, but actually people who vote and make their decisions by that.
If I may add on this, I think Kristjan has absolutely got it right, because the fact that China is kind of enabling economically Russia to go on with this war has really impacted the European image of China. And I think the Chinese government has recently woken up to this reality that what we do with the Russians actually impacts the European thinking. I don't see any conclusions yet, and I don't expect Chinese policy to really change. But nevertheless, this is a really, really crucial aspect.
So I wanted to tie, I think, two pretty dramatic events that have happened also recently in Europe. Of course, Ukraine has captured, understandably, a lot of the attention, but there's been renewed tension in Kosovo. And again, this has been a long-standing dispute, and of course, even more dramatically when we see the events of Nagorno-Karabakh. So I'm just curious from your perspective of what you think went wrong. Was it sort of a sense of not being able on the European American side to anticipate the surprising and rapid attack? And is there down the line, I think, an opportunity for renewed re-engagement by the United States and Europe in not only the Balkans, but also in the Caucasus?
Yes, both the Kosovo situation and situation in the South Caucasus writ large is something that we are tracking very closely. After all, we really believe in the indivisibility of security. So when there are problems, challenges elsewhere, they may have indirect impact to our own security. And if we can be of any assistance in solving some of the crises or challenges that may not be immediately next door, we'd rather try to do that. Now, in the light of the current situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, I think it's remarkable how Armenia, which is probably the most vital democracy in South Caucasus right now, how Armenia has been steadily repositioning itself when it comes to geostrategic preferences. And even though we all know, those of you who have followed the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh or around it, what kind of how toxic this issue has been within the Armenian society for ages. How the current leadership has been able to navigate this issue, and as we speak, certainly is reassessing its former security arrangements, particularly the reliance on Russia as the security provider. So if there at all is any silver lining in the recent developments, then I believe the fact that there has been such strategic realignment that hopefully will eventually bring more stability to this corner of the world, hopefully will help Armenians also out of the situation where they have been for many years, being a hostage of their own allies, so to say. Then I think that's it. Now with Kosovo, the situation certainly is very fragile. But I think the fact that NATO has been able to adjust its let's say force posture, its messaging, and certainly has been a force of not just force of good, but the force that can be and is being reckoned with on a daily basis or on the field, so to say, is a good example of hopefully how the Serbian government and Serbians can also make their choices when they look to the future.
Perhaps on Nagorno-Karabakh, I've been even there and Armenia many times. I think for the students, an important aspect here is that whenever you listen to this news and follow this discussion, it's really important to take a look at the map. What does it look like? And now when you kind of imagine Armenia, you see it's a landlocked country. Most of the neighbors are having hostile relations with them, with the exception of Georgia. Logistically, the country is in a very difficult, tight spot. So I think it's going to be very hard for them, given the geopolitical realities around the country, to kind of find too many alternatives for their foreign policies. So if you look at the Finnish map or Finland on the map, you see immediately changes. We have several hundred miles of land border with Sweden and Norway, full of logistical opportunities to the Atlantic, etc., etc. So the geography impacts a lot what choices you have. And if you're a landlocked country, you are dependent on everybody around you by a force of nature. And that makes the situation for them really, really challenging. This is no news to Armenians. They've lived in that land for thousands of years, so they know how to cope with that. But I think it's going to demand a lot of attention from all of us, a lot of kind of multi-instrument work to make sure that that country can also succeed as the only, or as perhaps the best so far functioning democracy in the region.
Those are really important, raising so many geographic and territorial issues. But I'd like to go back to something that's specifically for Estonia and Finland. You're very much at the forefront of the digital agenda, and you're part of what is the D9 countries. Europe is doing so much in the digital space with its single market and so forth. Could you tell us a little bit about what you were doing in the digital arena? And then the second sort of follow-up from that, we often think that the United States and Europe are on, I suppose, a different digital path. I mean, you know, in terms of the regulation of AI or data flows, data privacy. How are you going to reconcile that?
Perhaps I can start this time. I mean, digital, obviously, I think our basic conclusion is that the European regulation on these privacy rules is a success, and it's working. It doesn't really prevent business from flourishing. So I think it's been a good path forward, and I think there's a broad consensus in our societies that this is the way it should be. Then, if you look at the next step, which is the AI. We have, I think now we have an European sort of level legislation in the process. I think Finland, as together with Estonia, we are one of those countries which do have an important AI industry. So this is a really important thing for us. Perhaps I only kind of leave you with the idea that we of course follow really closely how the US now intends to regulate that field. We see that the US is basically, the approach is that you see this more of an opportunity, and instead of challenge or risk. Then your industries are now self-regulating the issue, so you are kind of careful not to over-regulate them when the whole thing is just growing and developing. And I think I understand also that how can you regulate real time something that moves so fast? I mean, your people on the Hill are also busy with something else. So it's a really tough. It's a moving target. So that's the US approach. European approach has traditionally been more legalistic, more sort of heavily loaded with regulation. So this might, there's a lot of sentiment in Europe that this is a dangerous thing. This needs to be regulated. So personally, I just hope that we strike the right balance, because the danger is that if you kind of over-regulate something, which is still kind of in its taking first steps, then you might actually destroy your own industry before it's even born. So I think it's and of course this is also a case for cooperation across the Atlantic, because I think AI is something that we need to also develop together, so that the regulatory frameworks don't get too far. There's not too much distance between them.
Yeah, I probably should say something here as well, even though it's always a tough act to follow Mikko on that, because he is certainly my go-to ambassador when I want to know more about some of the technological trends and also the trends when it comes to business interests on both sides of the Atlantic in all things digital. But I guess it is right that our countries are in the camp where we may be less enthusiastic at some points in terms of regulating the new industries. It's partly because of our instincts. We are, after all, more like free-trading nations that want to do business. But it's also because of our own technology industry that we have, that has gone through the previous cycles of let's say getting off ground, just because there was not too much regulation in place, and because even though some of the technological solutions may have been very novel, they were not their wings were not clipped when they started. Now, having said that, I think there is certainly more understanding when it comes to agreeing to a certain set of key principles when it comes to use of technology and particularly use of data and conditions on privacy. So I believe our nations again are for agreeing to some key principles, and then seeing how the technology can prosper and flourish within those those bounds. And it starts from, I believe, from the ownership of data, or how we handle data. And I certainly believe that our approach, whereby when it comes to personal data, that the person is the owner of data, and the person can really authorize or not authorize different government and private sector entities to use this data. It's actually something that in many cases has allowed our societies to offer world-class public and private sector services to the level that, as you mentioned before, maybe a dream in America and in some other societies. Because after all, when it comes to providing good public sector services, or good private sector services for that matter, it all comes down to trust. And at certain point, I believe, if the trust element is not as strong as in our societies, then the companies and the governments hit the glass ceiling, where people are really reluctant to go further. Whereas in our societies, there has been hunger for more services, both from the public sector or the government, or from private sector, for more digital services, because our general public believes that the safeguards are there, and they ultimately have the control over handling of their own data.
So this is a time where, you can see a microphone over there. That is your instrument to shine and to ask questions. Please line up. Remember 3 rules. Number 1, be civil. Number 2, make sure your statement ends with a question mark. That's always helpful. And number 3, turn around just to make sure there's probably people behind you. So try to channel your inner concise selves, please. So if you want, step up, ask a question, be polite, and engage.
We try to be civil as well.
Hi, greetings. I'm sorry I was very late. I'm coming from Greenbelt and I made 3 mistakes.
Is your microphone on, sir? Sorry, just to make sure.
No, it's on.
It's on.
Ambassador of Finland, your recent accession to NATO, can you tell us if the Russians have done like vastly increased aggressive maneuvers and things on your border, or what's been the fallout, or like really extreme things in trade, or did they kind of accept that as a fait accompli?
Well, thanks for the question. First of all, militarily, the situation is calm. The reason being at least partly the fact that most of the Russian forces on that side of the border have left. I think the strength levels are 20-30% of the normal times. And those troops are in Ukraine, they are engaged. Many of them will not come back for certain reasons, you understand. So what does this mean politically? I think it indicates that actually NATO or Finland or any other country being in NATO itself is actually not a real problem for Russia. Because if they would have to fear NATO and Finland now being in NATO, they could not afford to leave that area half empty. So I don't think, for example, as a consequence that Ukraine, the Russian attack on Ukraine, it's not really about NATO. They know perfectly that NATO is not going to attack Russia. And they know perfectly that Finland, as a member of NATO, will never, ever, under any circumstance, attack Russia. So I think they are throwing their true colors. Well, in the long run, I expect that they will rebuild and they will have some activities there, more activities, but to give you a short answer, nothing extraordinary so far has taken place. Economically, our trade with, we are now trading more with Australia than we trade with Russia. Our trade is minus 80%. With them. So main reason are the sanctions, and also in the case of many of those companies that deal with things that are not sanctioned, they have decided to leave. So this is the economic reality. So then your third aspect was that is this all? I don't think so. I think the Finnish-Russian relationship in the future will be heavily dependent on how the NATO, how the EU-Russia relationship will develop. It doesn't look good, certainly, because I think they try to keep this war, keep on going with this war for a very long time.
Let's take 2, so we'll take 1 here and then 1 here just for, if that's okay, for efficiency. So Isaac, remember, in the self, concise.
Thanks for your time, gentlemen. So American politics and politicians are very unique as compared to other NATO members. Do you see that as a hindrance to the organization's efficiency?
Madam?
Oh, and I was going to ask if you could elaborate a little bit more on the public support for the war in Ukraine as your countries have mandatory conscription, and also as it relates to the rise in your far-right party in Finland in the last election.
Okay, I take this one as well. So about conscription. So in our case, it actually means that all the men are obliged to serve. So I have served, most of my male colleagues have served. Women can do it voluntarily. So yes, we take defense extremely seriously. And about the far right parties, we do have a party called Finns or True Finns, who is now part of the coalition government. It gets easily labeled as a far right party. But if you look at the party program, and I'm a civil servant, I belong to no party, I have no party affiliation, so I look at this issue from a distance. If you look at the program and the public statements by the leadership, if all the True Finns party would be tomorrow shipped to the US, and they would get active in the US politics, you would label them as mainstream Republicans. Yes. So I think this is the kind of the reality. So anything that is far left or far right in Finnish politics is pretty tame by any other standard. So don't get too worried about this. And in our case, we have, I think, 8, 9 parties now in the parliament. So we always have to form a coalition government. So True Finns are now roughly 20% of the vote. So there's no chance ever that they or anybody else, for that matter, could get to govern all by themselves. They would still need other parties with different persuasions to be part of the coalition. And obviously, any kind of program this kind of coalition will have doesn't reflect what the single part of the coalition wants. It's always a compromise. So these kind of elections, when they always produce coalition governments, these kind of radical moves in Finnish politics are quite difficult to make, and nobody is seeking to undermine the basic democratic nature of the system.
If I may, I'll take the question about the public support and also the, as you said, the American politicians are quite special or something, right? When it comes to public support and I would say public attention to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, it's one of the very few issues that people across the political spectrum they pay attention to and they agree on. We had elections, parliamentary elections, March this year. This was the topic that parties ran on, and they really tried to, trump each other or over-trump each other on how much money they are willing to spend on defense and how much aid they are willing to send to Ukraine, or how much spent for receiving the Ukrainian refugees in Estonia. So this is an issue that I don't see disappearing. And for the reason that for most Estonians, this war has existential undertones. We understand that the war that ends up in a way that gives Putin the possibility to think that he succeeded will have tragic consequences not only for Ukraine but also other nations on the in the same transatlantic space. And finally, the question about the politics and politicians. I mean, all politics is local. Most politicians are local as well, or think local. And in fact, I think we all have instances in our own countries where where politics take strange turns. But then again, whatever happens on the Capitol Hill in this country will impact not just this country, not just our countries, but will have global attention and will have global impact. And for that reason, I certainly hope that the Congress can find a solution that is acceptable and that will send a strong signal to the world that US is not backing down from its attention and assistance to the free world.
Ambassador, would it be better to take all 4 questions just to make sure, since they're standing up, is that okay to sort of make a final round robin of all questions? So we'll alternate. So please, madam, and then sir, and then.
Kiitos Mikko ja Aita Kristjan. Coming from Finland, I'm especially interested in what you Mikko have to say, but I hope that Kristjan can answer as well. I was wondering, where do you see Finland and Estonia going in terms of integrating climate policy more into their foreign policy, especially in this current situation and Finland being historically dependent on Russian oil and gas, but also in terms of immigration, when we see more climate immigration coming to Scandinavian and Baltic countries. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors, for speaking today. My question is directed to the ambassador of Estonia. Estonia has a significantly large minority of Russian diaspora. Have you noticed any different sentiments towards the Russian-Ukrainian war between that group and the rest of Estonia?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. I would just want to add, I just want to ask a question in regards to the expansion of NATO. I do know that Sweden's bid to join NATO is currently being blocked by Turkey, especially knowing that Sweden is a key ally for both of your countries. Where do you stand on this issue, or how do you suggest we move forward?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask, a lot of the security things you talked about, especially within China, are talking about strength and unity with your allies and providing for the national defense. I was wondering what sort of tools of de-escalation you are looking at during this time in reducing global tensions. Thank you.
If I start with Sweden, it's very simple. Where do we stand? I wake up every morning praying that Sweden would be member today. I go to sleep every evening praying that at least it's going to happen tomorrow. So we are waiting for that. We are supporting for that. I'm optimistic myself. Sweden meets all the criteria. They would make absolutely great ally to all of the NATO countries. It's one of the strongest industrial nations in Europe. They are heavily invested in defense, and Sweden delivers. It's a country that delivers. It's no BS country, to put it bluntly. So we would be all better off having Sweden as our ally. That's clear. On climate and energy policy. First of all, Finland is not dependent on Russian gas or oil. It's not the case. We actually, Russians closed all the gas exports April last year. We only had like 7-8% of our energy consumption was covered by gas. Mainly it actually went to the sort of industrial use. It's been replaced by LNG. So zero gas from Russia, no problem for Finland. Oil, it's a global commodity. So obviously, during normal times, it made economic sense to buy oil from 40 miles away to our refinery than have it shipped from Kuwait for several thousands of nautical miles. No longer the case. We are just fine. So no dependency, no problem here. What is really important here is that Finland has now, I would say, the cleanest electricity and the cheapest electricity in Europe, because we have a lot of biofuel, we have nuclear, and increasingly we have a lot of wind. Our latest nuclear power station went online April, and actually it turned Finland from a electricity importer into an exporter overnight. We have now opened the whole world's first nuclear safe waste deposit. Nobody else has it up and running, including the US. So I think energy-wise, climate-wise, I think we are making great progress. Finland's, just to give another example, out of our waste, communal waste, just 1% goes into landfills. 1%. Ask about the local neighborhood. What are the numbers? So that gives you the idea. But great question. Climate policy is part of our foreign policy. We speak about it everywhere. We try to be a good partner in providing technologies, support, education, and it's going to be like that also in the future.
All right. On the very same issue, I think the trends are somewhat similar. When it comes to renewables, for example, I believe Estonia is among the top in Europe. 30% of energy mix comes out of renewables. The natural gas was never higher than, I believe, 7%. And the Russian natural gas has been fully replaced when it comes to LNG by other sources, and it's pretty clear that what Russia has done with its invasion against Ukraine, among other results of it, or second or third order effects. It's been the speeding up the technological transformation and the transformation of supply chains, particularly in Europe, but also more globally. And whereas there have been a lot of stories about Russia still being able to sell its oil to different global buyers. Yes, they are still selling more oil and at a higher price point than we would like to see. It's not about spite; it's about financing their war or the need to curb their ability to finance the killing in Ukraine. But what we see is that the profitability of their oil industry is already down. And when it comes to natural gas, they are really not doing well, meaning that, again, the speed of transformation in Europe when it comes to climate technologies and more, let's say, climate conscious and thrifty use of energy has been sped up. Now, there was a question about the Estonian Russian community. It's like with every minority, it's a long story, but just very generally saying, there are different opinions within this community. Certainly are those who think that somehow Ukraine invaded Russia within Ukraine by bombing Kiev and Bucha and other cities, but unfortunately this is not unique. So unlike many countries in the world where we've seen that actually the local Russian diaspora has even organized rallies in support of Ukraine. We've not seen something like that happening in Estonia. So I think it's actually fair to say that that for Russian speaking community also in Estonia, the war and the tragedy of this war is so close that the general understanding of who's right, who's wrong, is probably even at the higher level than in other countries that are further away from Russia and Ukraine. Well, some other questions, but again, remind me.
Ask about de-escalatory diplomatic practice.
De-escalation. So, does this work? Yes, no. De-escalation. Obviously, this is a rather loaded issue because, first of all, if I take Ukraine, Russia is specifically trying to kind of design and manage the whole discussion in a way that we should be responsible to find those de-escalation measures. And this is part of the idea that they kind of try to lead us to believe that we were some kind of we began this conflict. So we have to be really careful with these concepts in the sense that who's proposing them, for what purpose, how genuine and serious they are, etc., etc. So I know it's really important discussion, and we're all for peace. Obviously, nobody's opposing peace. Certainly, not small countries that are exposed like Finland and Sweden. But there's a lot of kind of bad will around this discussion, and a lot of kind of subtle attempts to kind of mess up the discussion. I think it's very simple in this specific case. Russians started the war. I think they are supposed to face the consequences. They bear responsibility for it. They could stop the war tomorrow, but they don't want to. I don't see any indication whatsoever on the Russian side to really meaningfully engage in negotiations, other than negotiations in which Ukrainians would give up their rights and give the Russians basically a free hand. So pushing for peace is a bit too simple approach. We have to push for a justifiable peace. There has to be a justice element in it. There's also accountability aspect. How can you start this kind of war that leads to most likely hundreds of thousands of casualties, civilians like today? And it just happened. You have to face, you have to have accountability here. So we're all for peace, but it has to be just, and it has to cover accountability issues. Then I think we all, if there's the other side who wants to do the same thing for the Ukrainians, then I think they can start talking. But we don't see that side emerging yet.
Yeah, if I can just add to the superb explanation that Ambassador Hautala gave right now, the example from not so distant history of Estonia. So our Prime Minister recently explained when there was a debate where she was asked, but what about seeking for peace or establishing peace? And she said that we are peaceful people. We don't want anything but peace. But we remember how it was only a couple of decades back in Estonia. there was peace there officially. But yet, particularly in the 1940s, 1950s, our people were killed within our own bounds of our own country, because it was also, the peace was also occupation. Our people were killed, thrown to jail, and even those who were not, their future was ruined. Several generations lost access to freedom, to doing whatever they wanted to do with their life. So peace, whereas a noble goal in itself, may not always be what we think of peace. And this is the reason why I believe when it comes to Ukraine, it's around 90% of support to establishing the fighting until they can establish Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, the borders that have been recognized and never disputed before they started the aggression by the Russian Federation.
So it comes to a point where I'm just going to give three very quick thanks. First of all, it takes a village to put these events together. A warm thanks to people in the Dean's office. I can see Alice over there who's been key. My good friend Brody here who's been instrumental in making this event happen. And give a warm thanks to people in the hub who are magicians at moving, reshaping, and putting so many events. An enormous thanks to all of you, because we need you to come to these events, to keep engaging. This is part of the experience. This is why you're here. Plug next week, my colleague Jordan Tamler is doing a book on bipartisanship in Congress. It still happens. Come and find out more. Wednesday, 4 o'clock on the 11th. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our two wonderful speakers for 2 wonderful hours engaging with all of our students and for coming today. Thank you, Ambassador Hautala. Thank you, Ambassador Prikk.
Thank you.